Fellas, without a doubt, June 2024 might have one of the most stacked lineups for cards. We have got so many cards and bangers this year in UFC, so I'm going to be ranking every major fight taking place in the UFC, every pay-per-view main event and co-main event, and every fight night main event and co-main event on a list from what is actually the best fight. I've also included a couple other fights from certain pay-per-views and fight nights that I think deserve to make the list. So a tier list from the best fights, S tier being this is one of the best fights to take place at a major pedestal in June, and then D tier being compared to the rest of the fights on this list is kind of ass. So let me know your thoughts on this list, but we'll go in there with the first fight, and it's taking place this weekend, the main event of UFC 302. Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier. I'm actually really hyped for this main event, and I'm going to put it in A tier. Now, at first, the whole narrative going into this fight was, oh, Makhachev's going to run him over, and I feel like a majority of MMA fans still feel like, or most MMA fans still feel that way, but I've got a weird feeling, and I feel like other people do, that Dustin Poirier is going to find a way to win. It's his last chance at a title shot, potentially his last fight in the UFC, and he's fighting the best fighter in the UFC. It just doesn't make sense for him to win, and that's why I've got a weird feeling that Dustin Poirier, he might just land a right hand or latch up a guillotine and get the win here. Either way, it's going to be either a finish from Islam Makhachev within a few rounds, or it's going to be Dustin Poirier getting one of the biggest upsets in UFC history, and you've got to put it in A tier. I'm hyped to see Dustin Poirier get that title shot, especially after his last performance against Benoit Saint-Denis. Even if Islam Makhachev were facing Arman Tsarukyan, I don't even think I'd put that in A tier either, because even though it would be a more competitive fight, at least on paper, there's something about Poirier going in there and getting his last title shot against the pound for pound #1 best in the UFC. I'm just really intrigued to see this fight. Either it's going to be Makhachev dominating, submitting Poirier within 2 rounds, or Dustin Poirier, he's going to get the biggest upset in UFC history, at least one of the biggest upsets in UFC history by beating Islam Makhachev. So I'm going to put this in A tier. Super, super hyped. It's not S tier level because, again, it's not as, I think S tier has to be a little bit more competitive than this. And even though it'll be great to see Poirier get that shot, I just don't think it's going to be that competitive. But I'm hyped. I want to see Poirier do well, and Makhachev, to be fair. So I'm going to put it in A tier for now. UFC 302 headliner. Great, great fight, and I can't wait to see it. And then we have a headliner for one of the most stacked fight nights, honestly, in UFC history. Like, I was going to say of 2024, but you can say UFC history. Whittaker versus Chimaev. I almost called him Chittica. Whittaker versus Chimaev. I can't wait for this fight. I'm going to put this in A tier too. Now, the only reason that it's not in S tier is because I'm a little bit worried. And I guess if this worry actually goes into play, then it might not even make A tier. But I'm a little bit worried that it might just be Chimaev, and I know this is unlikely because of how good Whittaker's wrestling is, but I'm a bit worried that Chimaev might end up just holding Whittaker down and it not being the most action-packed fight, similar to the Usman first round. And the Kamaru Usman fight with with Chimaev wasn't a bad fight, but I feel like it wasn't as good as we thought it was going to be, and I'm a bit worried that that could happen with this fight. On paper, though, it's great. You've got undefeated Khamzat Chimaev, who's ran through everyone. Well, not ran through everyone, but got some great names on his resume. Had an explosive start to his UFC career, a lot of momentum on his name, and he's undefeated. He's a big star. Taking on his biggest test yet in Robert Whittaker, who's been at the top of the middleweight division for the longest time. Potential #1 contender fight behind Strickland and Costa, which we're also going to see on this list. So I'm going to put it in A tier. I can't wait for this fight. It's Chimaev's toughest test, and I honestly think Whittaker definitely has the capability to beat Chimaev. I can't wait for this fight. Fight night main event on a stacked fight night, but the only reason that it's not in S tier is because I'm a bit worried that it could end up being just Chimaev taking Whittaker down and not doing enough to get the submission, but enough to keep him down, and it might not just be the most action-packed fight. So I'll put that one in A tier. Super hyped for it, though. I mean, you've got Chimaev and Whittaker, one of the best in the middleweight division, giving Chimaev his toughest test yet. He's got to make the list. So A tier for Chimaev and Whittaker. The next fight we have is a fight that's only just been announced this weekend, and it's actually a pretty decent fight. Ian Garry versus MVP. Now, hear me out. I don't want to be negative Nancy. I think this fight might look better on paper than it actually is. I'm going to put it in B tier. I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this. Don't get me wrong. I'm excited to see it, and it's a massive improvement for UFC 303. And I do think it's going to be a really, really technical stand-up fight in the middleweight, no, not middleweight, welterweight division. But I'm afraid that it might just be a bit of a counter-punching nightmare matchup where it's just MVP waiting for Ian Garry to close the distance, Ian Garry waiting for MVP to close the distance, because we saw Ian Garry versus Jeff Neal wasn't the most interesting fight, and I feel like MVP does well against guys that are going to dart in and push the pace, and I don't think Ian Garry really suits that narrative. He'll put the pressure on you if you're a guy like Neil Magny, but I'm not sure if he's going to push the pressure on MVP. I think it's going to be super technical, and on paper, this is a straight ST matchup, but I'm a bit worried that this fight might look better on paper than it's actually going to perform. Quite similar to how MVP versus Wonderboy, you look at it on paper, two phenomenal strikers, but you put them against each other, and I'm a bit worried that it might not perform. So I'm going to put it in B tier. I still think it's going to be a great fight. Like, compared to the rest of the fights on this list, you know, the standard for this list is extremely high. So it's still an amazing fight. I'm not going to sit here and say it's going to be boring or anything like that. It's going to be a high-class technical fight, and the winner's going to get pushed closer to that welterweight title. But I feel like it might just be a lot of feeling out. They might both be waiting for each other to come in, and because of that, it might just be a very kind of feeling out process type of fight. So I'm going to put MVP versus Ian Garry, even though it's a huge improvement to UFC 303, and I'm excited to see both of them go against each other. I just don't think it's going to be as good as the rest of the fights on this list. Like, I can't really put MVP and Ian Garry on the same level as, like, you know, Chimaev and Whittaker. So I'll put it in B tier. Still a good fight, but I don't think it's going to be like this insane masterclass on the feet where one of them, and like for that to happen, one of them would have to be significantly worse than the other on the feet, and that's just not the case. So I'm putting that fight in the B tier. Then we've got, also on UFC 303, Jamal Hill versus Carlos Ulberg. This fight is going in B tier. This is also going in B tier. I was going to put it in A tier. Yeah, I think Jamal Hill's going to get chinned, and that's why I put it in B tier. I think Jamal Hill's going to get chinned. I'm more excited than now that Carlos Ulberg is in than Khalil Rountree. I've heard a lot of people, they're kind of, you know, they're kind of mad that because they wanted Khalil Rountree to fight, and now that Carlos Ulberg is in, they're quite disappointed. I actually think Carlos Ulberg is a much funner matchup for the fans than Khalil Rountree. It's nothing against Khalil Rountree, but Carlos Ulberg has finished, 5 of his last 5 fights in a row. He's coming off a great knockout over Alonzo Menifield in like 12 seconds. He's a tall, rangy, dangerous, powerful striker with a great left hand, just like Pereira was. I'm not comparing their striking styles. And he's good against Jamal Hill, who's just been knocked out. One of these guys are getting slept. You've got 2 power punchers, 2 elite strikers, and one of them's just come off a quick knockout, and one of them's literally just been knocked out at UFC 300. I think this is going to be a B tier fight. I don't think it's going to be a war like an A tier, like a Chimaev or a Whittaker, or I don't think it's going to be, you know, a complete shutdown like a Makhachev versus Poirier. I don't have the same excitement for those fights, but I still think it's going to be a fun fight, and I can almost guarantee that there's going to be a finish from one end. You've got 2 hard-hitting light heavyweights who both have decent accuracy as well. Both, you know, after their last performances as well. I mean, one of them's got a higher chance of being KO'd, and then one of them's come off a good KO. So for that fight, Hill versus Ulberg, I'm giving that a B tier. I'm excited for the fight. I'm actually more excited than I were for the Rountree fight as well. Then we've got a Fight Night main event, Perez versus Tyra. Probably the worst main event we've got this month, but it's not that bad. Now that we've seen Perez KO Nicolau and Tyra's undefeated, it's a better main event, but I'm going to have to put it in C tier. Again, I don't think it's a bad fight. We're probably going to see Tyra go out there. I just think the clash of styles could make this quite a bad fight. We saw with Perez and Makhachev. Undefeated Makhachev with a grappling base went in there, and he didn't make it the funnest fight against Perez. Every time that there was a striking exchange, he shot for a takedown, and I feel like Tyra's going to do the same thing. Even though Tyra's improved his striking, he's got a very heavy grappling base that I think he's going to try and impose onto Perez, and I feel like it might just be a clash of styles that isn't that interesting. Also on paper, compared to the rest of the fights on this list, it just doesn't hit the same, and I don't think there's any emotional baggage into who wins this fight, if you know what I mean. There's not really much excitement for this fight. It's going to be cool if Tyra wins and we have a new contender in the flyweight division, and if Perez can actually get a 2-fight winning streak, that's going to be crazy as well, but I just can't say that I'm as excited for that fight as I am for the rest of the fights on this list. So even though it's not that bad of a fight night main event, and it's an improvement from Perez versus Nicolau, now that Perez has got the KO and Tyra's undefeated, I can't put it on a B tier. I can't put this on the same level as like a Hill and Ulberg or an MVP and Garry. I just can't. So yeah, Perez versus Tyra, that's going in C tier. Then we've got the biggest fight of the year, Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. That is going to have to make our first S tier. I know there's going to be people in the comments, oh, it's not prime McGregor. It's not going to be the most technical fight on this list. Mate, it's a McGregor fight. You know what I mean? When Conor McGregor fights, you've got to put it in S tier. The whole world is watching. We get to see McGregor return after his fights with Poirier. even though it's not going to be the most technical fight on this list, first of all, I can almost guarantee it's going to end in a stoppage. You've got Michael Chandler, an explosive striker who 90% of his fights end in a finish, whether it's him, doing some terrible fight IQ decision and he ends up getting finished himself, or he lands a big shot and KOs someone, or if Conor McGregor goes out there and sleeps him, because Conor McGregor's got a high finish rate as well, whether it's him getting finished or finishing other opponents. So it's 99% going to end in a finish. I'm quite interested to see McGregor as well, because obviously he's done the films, he's done the movies, he's had the coke, he's been out of shape and everything, and now he's coming back to the UFC. I'm actually kind of interested to see how he does against Michael Chandler, who's also had quite a long layoff as well. But, mate, it's a McGregor main event. They've had this rivalry going on. I'm excited to see the fight. I can't wait for the press conference as well. And Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler, I'm putting that in S tier. If you're saying that you're not excited for that and you're not going to tune in, you're just lying. Everyone in the world is tuning in for this fight, and I definitely will be. So Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. Performance-wise, I think it's going to do great. Is it the most high-level fight on this list? No. But it's Conor McGregor versus Chandler, man. It's going to end in a finish. It's a big fight. Massive fight, actually. It's got to make the S tier for this list. Then we've got the co-main event. I think this is the co-main event for the Perez versus Tyra fight. And it's Dustin Jacoby versus Dominic Reyes. Yeah, co-main event, and it's got to make the D tier. I mean, it's just not got much interest. I mean, you've got Dominic Reyes, who hasn't won a fight since he fought Chris Weidman back in 2019, and ever since he fought John Jones, he's been on a big losing streak. He's kind of one of those fighters we just want to see retire, and then he's against Dustin Jacoby, who's not an extremely exciting fighter. Maybe if we were feeding Dominic Reyes to like an up-and-coming prospect, this would be more interesting, but he's fighting Dustin Jacoby. The guy can't even make the rankings of the light heavyweight division, obviously. Lost to Alonzo Menifield as well. Lost to a couple of the top guys in the division. I just don't really care about this fight. If Dominic Reyes wins, I guess that's kind of interesting because he's ended his losing streak, but it doesn't really mean anything. And if he loses, oh well, Dominic Reyes has lost again. Who cares? So that's co-main event, straight into D tier. Yeah, probably shouldn't be the co-main event for a fight night. Probably shouldn't have happened at all, to be honest. Dominic Reyes should not be in the UFC anymore. His chin has gone. His skill, I don't know what's happened since the Jones fight, but he's completely gone downhill. Anyway, talking of fight night, it's actually a pretty decent fight night main event. Cannonier versus Imavov. Yeah, fight night main event. Another contender fight in the middleweight division, to be honest. This could also count as a contender fight because Cannonier's on a bit of a winning streak. I'm going to put this in B tier. I think this is going to... No, actually, I'm going to put that in A tier. I think this is going to be a really, really fun striking matchup. Now, if you would have asked me this before the Cannonier and Vettori fight, I probably would have put this in C tier or B tier because before that, Cannonier was just quite a ploddy striker who didn't really... He wasn't the most high-output fighter like we saw in the Vettori fight. He wasn't the most interesting fighter as well. Obviously, his fight with Adesanya was super boring. But that Vettori fight, I don't know if he's been taking some secret supplements or he's completely switched the game plan, but Cannonier looks much better in that Vettori fight. And he's fighting Imavov, who's a top striker, extremely underrated striker in the welterweight division, obviously coming off that great win over Delidze. And I think this is going to be a really interesting striking matchup. I think on the feet, it's going to be a back-and-forth war. It's going to be bloody, and it's a fight night main event, so we've got 5 rounds of this, and I can't wait. And the winner is going to progress into the welterweight rankings closer to that title shot area. So Cannonier versus Imavov, great fight right there. Great fight night main event, and the winner, it means a lot for them because they could potentially push into that contender status. So A tier straight up. That's going to be a great fight on the feet. Probably one of the best stand-up fights we've actually got on this list. Like we talked about MVP and Ian Gary maybe not performing as well as we thought he would be. I can almost guarantee that Cannonier and Imavov is going to perform. 2 high-level strikers with high output. That's going to be a great fight right there. So that's going straight into A tier. And then we've got the co-main event of UFC Saudi Arabia. Sergey Pavlovich versus Alexander Volkov. Mate, I'm putting this in A tier as well. I can't wait for this fight, man. I can't wait. This is, even though it's a bit of an odd matchup considering they're, the training partners, mate, I can't wait. You've got Sergey Pavlovich, the dude who obviously before the Aspinall fight was just finishing everyone in the first round. 6 first-round finishes in a row. Had some good wins under his name as well. Derek Lewis, Tai Tuivasa, Curtis Blades, who's literally now facing Aspinall for the interim belt. And he's extremely dangerous on the feet, is Sergey Pavlovich. I'd argue he's one of the top 3 most dangerous fighters on the feet in the heavyweight division. And then you've got Alexander Volkov, who maybe doesn't have the same danger factor when it comes to just shutting you down immediately. But he breaks you down. He's on a 3-fight winning streak, all by way of finish. And he's looked great as well. Volkov has been around for a long time, and it seems like Volkov beats everyone except the top guys of the division. And it's a big test for Sergey Pavlovich because this ain't just another fat heavyweight for him to run over. This is a good striker for Sergey Pavlovich. Volkov is a great striker. We've seen time and time again, tall, rangy, great at using his kickboxing, so it's a test for Pavlovich, but Volkov standing across there from Sergey Pavlovich, one of the most dangerous men in the UFC. I'm really interested in this fight. Can almost guarantee it's going to end in a stoppage as well. Two heavyweights up there that aren't even just fat heavyweights. They're actually really solid heavyweights. So, Pavlovich versus Volkov. I can't wait for that. And again, the winner of this fight will be pushed closer to that title area. Obviously, there's not much at the top of the heavyweight division. There's Aspinall, there's Blades, and apart from that, there isn't really much of a contender. So, the winner of this could easily be pushed closer to that title area. So, Pavlovich, Volkov, I can't wait. Straight up 80 for that one. Then we've got the co-main event of this weekend. Sean Strickland versus Paulo Costa. Strickland versus Costa. That's going into S tier as well. Actually, no. Does that go into S tier or does that go into A tier? I'm going to put it in S tier, man. Why not? I'm putting that in S tier. I think the clash of styles is going to make this a war. The co-main event of UFC 302. It's a big deal. There's going to be a lot of eyes on it. Sean Strickland, a big star. Paulo Costa, obviously well-known guy, but the fight itself, I think, is going to be an absolute banger. Paulo Costa, in that, even though he lost that Whittaker fight, he looked amazing. Paulo Costa looked better, the best he has ever had in that Whittaker fight. He looked amazing. Even though he was losing, he looked clean, he looked sharp, he looked powerful, nearly finished Whittaker. I think it was the first round. And then Sean Strickland, obviously, recently he's done great as well. He was on a bit of a winning streak, got one of the biggest upsets in UFC history against Adesanya. Just about fell short to Dricus du Plessis, and now that I think this is the official #1 contender fight, I think this is going to be great, because either Sean Strickland's going to walk down Paulo Costa and put on an absolute masterclass, or Paulo Costa's going to fire back and clip Strickland and finish him. Either way, both of these guys are going to stand in the center. Well, I don't think it's going to be... I wouldn't say they're going to stand in the center of the octagon and throw it all out there, because Strickland's not really the type of guy to do that. But it's going to be a stand-up fight. It's going to be bloody. It's going to be dangerous from both of them, and I think this is going to be one of the most high-level and entertaining striking matchups on this list. I think this is going to be an absolute war. Like, I honestly think this would be a funner fight than a Strickland versus Whittaker, because of the type of guy that Paulo Costa is. So, Costa versus Strickland, I think this is going to be the fight of the night for UFC 302, and it's going in S tier. And then the final fight we have on this list, I think this is the featured fight of one of the fight nights. I forgot which fight night it is. It might be the Perez versus Tyra one, and it's Ikram Aliskerov versus Andre Muniz. Now, obviously, Ikram Aliskerov, one of the most exciting prospects in the UFC. I think this guy's going to get ranked soon. Definitely my favourite unranked prospect in the middleweight division. Taking on Andre Muniz, who's a decent grappler. He's been up there. He's faced a lot of the top guys, but he's just not good enough to make the rankings. So it's a step up in competition, and obviously, if Ikram Aliskerov wins this fight, he's going to be in the rankings. I'm going to put this in B tier. It's not going to be a war, but stylistically, it's a fun match. You've got Ikram Aliskerov, who's well-rounded, great striking, great grappling as well, obviously. We've seen in his short time in the UFC, and what he's done to these guys has been amazing. And then Andre Muniz, great jiu-jitsu as well, but he's just not the most consistent fighter. I think Ikram Aliskerov's going to finish him in the first three, whether he clips him on the feet or somehow wraps up a submission. I think clipping him on the feet is the more likely outcome, though, so we're going to see a finish from Ikram Aliskerov. He's going to progress into the rankings, and I feel like on paper it's a fun matchup. So for Ikram Aliskerov versus Andre Muniz, I'm giving that a B tier, but that is my list for every big fight that we have in June in the UFC. Let me know if I've missed any fights out. I don't think I have missed any fights out. Maybe you could include like a Kevin Holland versus McCall or something like that, but that's my list from S tier to D tier. Let me know your thoughts on the list. Do you agree with the placement? And thank you for watching.